G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day, and it's a Friday, at least here in Australia, but you'll be leading into it, so I hope that you're going to have a fantastic weekend as well. So today, as always, we have a fair bit to go over, but I'm hoping this one will be significantly shorter. If you want a tip from me, when I edit in 1.5 or 2 times speed, so maybe listen in that. I know I waffle on a little bit, but of course, we've got a bit to go over. So look, we need to look at what Boris Johnson has said. We're going to look at the maps, geolocations, see where things are moving, but I want to show you some footage that I missed yesterday as well that gives us a good idea of these fortifications. I missed that yesterday and I regret it, but I will show you today. We need to talk about what Putin has said about the future of attack and strikes into Russia and what the response may be with things like the Irish sneak as well. We need to talk about South Korea. We know South Korean intelligence has been working with Ukrainian intelligence, saying that North Korean soldiers are about to or have entered the battlefield. I don't know where they're getting their intel from, but we'll talk about that. And we'll talk about Ukraine wanting to buy South Korean weapons. South Korea has done a little bit of one of these ones to Germany, as far as Rheinmetall in Germany, Hanwha, with armoured vehicles has been a bit of a, oh shit, these are cheaper and better vehicles. I know that from the testing. But of course, one thing we have to talk about is last night, there was a massive missile attack from Russian planes, both Tu-95s, Tu-160s. Now, of course, the Tu-160s, these aren't used that much. Strategically, the picture in Ukraine at the moment, it doesn't really require these. There's not much danger in the air to the Tu-22s, Tu-95s, other than, mechanical failures, really. And Tu-160 is more a long-range supersonic strategic nuclear bomber, realistically, but we did see some missiles launch from those overnight, and this has left more than 1 million Ukrainians without power, and I do fear that this is just the beginning of Russia's winter bombing campaign against critical infrastructure. So let's have a little bit of a look now. How much battle damage is there? Look, these strikes, we have no idea. Both Ukraine and Russia have made it highly illegal to take photographs of anything that has been hit, so we don't know. But these are the numbers we can work off given here. But as you can see just from these numbers, that is a very large missile and drone attack. Here that 100% of the drones have been intercepted. Anything with these numbers, I question a lot. But those bombers will continue seeing probably firing a hell of a lot of long-range strikes in, especially as the temperatures go to cool down. Now, a lot of people go, oh, well, the Tu-160s, these used to be in Ukraine. They used to be, and there was a deal made with the nuclear bombers and these nuclear strategic bombers, like the Tu-160s as well, for debts that Ukraine had to get paid off by these going back to Moscow after the fall of the Soviet Union. Same with the nuclear weapons. The idea that these were somehow picked up and gone to America, we heard American politicians saying the weapons have gone to Putin. But it's one of those things. It's thrown around a lot, but does that have any sense in these bombs that are going to come back or whatever? No, not really. But if we continue to see the use of the Tu-160s, it will be interesting to see if we do eventually see one of those have a failure or maybe go down as well, or using other weapon systems. But let's look at the map. So of course we have Ukraine in the center, the capital of Kyiv. The red area is occupied since 22, purple since 14. The red check, of course, the ground that Russia is occupying over the past 24 hours. Now here is the bit that I missed yesterday. So we can see that all of Beretsky has come under occupation and further into Kursk, although just to fix this map, we saw Russian soldiers all the way out here. So it's probably more like this, even according to other Ukrainian maps. But in Beretsky here, we know this area, there's a hell of a lot of fortifications. And this is what I wanted to show you. This was just to the north of Kursk here. I showed you in the footage yesterday where we saw that Russian flag get hung up. But what I wanted to show you was this. What we see here is these Russian forces here throwing grenades into this trench line. But what I wanted to show you was how well built this trench line is. This is something actually uncommon that we see, really well built trench lines on the Ukrainian side. People will go, oh, no. It is true. There's a hell of a lot of lacking in fortifications for the time. For it's been over a decade on some fronts and minimum of 2.5 years on other front lines. Everywhere should look like this. But the reason I'm showing you this is these areas are coming under control, and these are heavily fortified defensive positions. These are very important. This isn't just some bloody guns in a tree line. This is like a heavily concrete reinforced line that then these forces take from. They're moving into that zigzag and these lines. Of course, these are like anti-drone areas you can run into. But even with that like little pillbox there, again, very interesting to see that those heavily fortified lines are coming under control, and a lot of these have come under control, and this is the whole threat of this front. I know people, the new slur is doomer. It's like, oh, you're doom posting. It's like, well, give me something positive to post. I'm not dooming. The real situation is fucking grim, and if you are ignoring that, then you're just not telling the truth about what the situation actually is on the front line. So let's have a look at the Syriac map, both to the north and within Kursk itself. So it shows all of Beretsky coming under control and basically red down through where my cursor is at the moment. Realistically, these are lining pretty similar up. If anything, Deep State actually shows more ground on the west of the train line. And as well, to just the south of Kursk, this here, these black lines, the reason I show you this is these are the defensive fortifications we were talking about that have seemingly come under control with very little relative resistance. Realistically, these lines, like, yeah, Russia's lost a hell of a lot of guys in here. It's attritional protracted war. That's what we expected to see anywhere. But it does seem that like the resistance moving into these like major final fortifications was a lot less than we thought. That's a concern, both manpower and the build-up of those lines. So we see that movement out from Dalny onto then Kursk. You can see where Syriac is showing the centre of Kursk coming under control. And this is something else that I wanted to point out here. Now, Oliver Carroll here, he's a foreign correspondent for The Economist, said the point isn't understood enough. Ukraine is fighting a war for its existence. So society, the sensitive, is to losing the youngest generation. Society is very sensitive to losing that, However, good fighters, they make 18 to 25-year-olds already the segment where the country is most vulnerable. The birth rate in Ukraine plummeted in the early 2000s. And this is what you can see here. He's putting this little gun thing, or finger gun, pointer into here in, the 15 to 19-year-old, 20 to 24-year-old, you can see very, very low amounts of birth rate. There's not many people sit in there. Of course, this comes after the US has really said, hey, look, you guys need to mobilise between that 18 and 25. But realistically, these are the future of the country to have children. And even that, there's not that many people sitting there after that birth rate plummet. You can see down into these other categories that if we're being told that there's years left of war, I don't believe that there is, but these 15 to 19, you need to take that into consideration also. And this is replying to Mikola, I won't try and pronounce his last name, I apologise, but asking Ukraine to mortgage its future by lowering fighting age to 18 without any long-term security commitment is kind of a 40 years in a bargain, to put it mildly. But what I say, this is what I'm calling the Ukrainian paradox. If you don't mobilise, you're going to lose a heap. If the war continues and Ukraine doesn't mobilise, the number one problem of the front line is manpower. It isn't spoken about because if bloggers talk about it, people will rightfully go, you go and fight. So they're ignoring it. And I think a lot of the command and the officials are ignoring it because it's easier on them. Instead of going, we've made a mistake, we should have mobilised like Jules, and he said, we go, oh, the US hasn't given us enough weapons. So it's being ignored there. But this is the paradox. If you don't mobilise, if Ukraine doesn't mobilise, I believe they'll lose a lot more. And if they do mobilise and redo the defences, one, this is going to take minimum of 1 to 2 years, probably more in that 18-month period. But then it is a gamble that you are risking victory being Pyrrhic or stopping the... Ukraine's first goal right now should be just to stop the bleeding, to stop that line creeping, whatever it takes to do that. Because if they're going to get negotiation, Putin will go, I want a lot more, because, well, then we'll continue going. But this is the paradox, is if you don't mobilise, you will lose a lot more ground. But if you do mobilise, like he's saying here, you are risking your future by these young people, and victory, even if there is a victory, it could be Pyrrhic. So choose wisely in that. But I think the worst case is what is happening right now, where there is no choice between mobilisation or negotiation. They're the two cards, I believe. But we're hanging in this limbo period where it's just an extension of suffering. Okay, so let's look over a few more things. Let's talk about this area a little bit more while we are in here. This is sort of all of the Pokrovsk sector. Now, Selidov out towards, well, from Selidov out to the west, of course, in the direction of Pokrovsk. You can see a couple of changes in here around Zavote has come under Russian control as well. Let's look at the map now. Surak showing more gains in here, but relatively fairly similar. The biggest difference is he's showing down to this Pushkini down here that it's basically running right down this tree line in there, which I would believe Russian army made new advance northwest of Petrivka, or clash with Ukrainian army continue in Zvote as well. But we can get an idea of why this has moved up in here at this geolocation right here. So right on the corner down Zvote, what we can see is that a Russian soldier, basically point blank, if I'm looking at this correct, has hit this Ukrainian tank. You can see these guys then abandoning the tank from here. They're jumping out. And then this RPG, I'm not sure if that is him firing it or it's, I don't know. Very, very close. I'm surprised that actually even armed. If you've ever fired any high explosive weapons, they're not armed as soon as it comes out of the tube. Like if you get a rocket launcher with some sort of rocket launcher and you fire at the ground, it won't explode. It takes an amount of turns before it actually explodes. And my knowledge, well, I can't remember. I would have known this when I was in Anti-Armour, but we'll do the Anti-Armour courses. I'm not sure how far an RPG actually takes to arm. There's a few factors in it, but that's where that is of that tank being destroyed. But another thing, we talked on the fortifications around this front. Now, just here, to just the south of Pokrovsk, just sitting right down in here. The exact position doesn't really matter. What matters is what we see get struck. So this is off then a Russian drone in here. You can get an idea of some more of the fortifications in here, but what I'm interested in is further on in the video. Oh no, maybe I've got the wrong video. Okay, I'll put it up here. There is a video, apologies, that shows an excavator being hit at that exact geolocation. I will find that. If I can't, I apologize, but it's an excavator digging in trenches. I'm sure you'll believe me. So there are still trenches being dug around Pokrovsk to make those fortified lines because of how important Pokrovsk, Minograd, Kurkov, and Velika Novosilka is. Although these are going to become strategically unimportant at some point in time, these are very, very important. So let's move our way just down a little bit, and Velika Novosilka, you can see more ground being made up in here. This is not a new advancement. This is a couple of days old. We saw those armoured vehicles working in here, but this area, this is should be a major concern. As well as just to the east of here, we see that Russia has increased control around here. I believe yesterday on Surak we showed fairly similar to this. Now let's move our way up. I believe that is all the red changes we have on the map. Toretsk in here. We did see some change yesterday, just in a little pocket down in here. And we see today, just around in this area, Surak showing this. It's actually hard to get an idea exactly what the front line looks like in Toretsk, but we do know there's a hell of a lot of fighting. So let's move our way up north. Now I wanted to show this because there seems to be a claim these days that anything that is, it's like you see any vehicle that has four wheels is a HIMARS system. Any dude that doesn't look like the most Western dude ever is a North Korean. You know what I mean? Or anyone who speaks English is a mercenary. And it's become a bit like that any fab is a Fab 3000. Now, this footage here, I think, gives you the best idea in Vovchansk of just the explosive nature of a Fab 3000. You can see, if this would go away, no, maybe not. You can see just how high that like mushroom cloud is reaching and how it dwarfs those buildings underneath. So no, not everything dropped is a Fab 3000. To be honest, Fab 3000 is probably less combat effective than multiple Fab 500s unless it was against a specific hardened target. But you can just see the sheer boom that carries. And of course, this comes with a lot of barotrauma injuries. You're blowing out your eardrums. You have overpressure injuries. All of this is a huge, huge problem, and not just psychologically. And we have seen around Vovchansk not really much fighting being done. Oh, sorry, not much like movement in the territory. A hell of a lot of fighting. And I think Russia's just turned to, let's just flatten the entire area. And we do see that movement through areas to be able to move is just flatten it, make it impossible to defend, and then move through. And I think this is what's going to occur in the winter. I disagree with History Legends, even if his video yesterday was absolutely hilarious. So He had a good chuckle. I wasn't expecting it. Where he believes the kilometre squares will increase through winter. I think it will decrease, but I think the destruction of the fortifications is going to increase, and then we're going to see large gains next year if Mr. Trump doesn't then end the war, which I don't know if that is possible. So let's move just then to the west of here. We have Sumy, Kursk, and of course the area where Ukraine is then occupying back inside of Russia. Now, I've spoken a fair bit about this. I just want to show you on the map where there was, according to Surek, a Russian advancement. See how this road turns out to the northwest to the north. He's saying that Russia has moved down in this area. It would make sense down in here, as we have seen, I can't remember this area here, but we did see some Ukrainian POWs taken by Russian forces there. I presume SF, just given by the way they're sort of moving around, I don't know. Sometimes I see guys and I'm like, that guy's had a lot of training. You can sort of just pick it. If you ever played sport, you can look at someone and go, oh, they know what they're doing. But I wanted to talk about something else, because I actually believe Ukrainian forces are stuck in Kursk. I think that if they pull out the amount of forces now that Russia's gained in here, or has moved into this area to try and push Ukraine out, they could just move across into Sumy. And I'm going to show you why I believe this could be a problem. So we see this. We have Sudzha, Pokrovsk, areas you're probably familiar with. Of course, this is where the area is being occupied. We have Sumy itself, and then down at this geolocation here, some 40 kilometres behind the front line, or 37, depending where you want to take it from. I should have gone out in here because, of course, Ukraine occupy beyond their own border. At the moment, we get footage like this. Now, Russian pages, they're claiming this is a HIMARS, but like how Ukraine claims anyone who's Asian is North Korean, Russia claim any vehicle that has 4 wheels is a HIMARS. I don't know. I don't believe anything that I see. But we can see 3 successful Iskander strikes against vehicles here, and it does look to be cooking off. So it may go in the line with some sort of missile carrying system. Maybe it's HIMARS, maybe it's AD. I don't know. Then we'll see a 3rd strike just to the right here. This is the other 2. We see then that Iskander strike. One thing I will say, the effectiveness of the Iskander has increased unbelievably. But what I'm getting at is Russia have a lot of drones and a lot of Iskanders in this area. That is causing problems for the soldiers in here. But if there is a withdrawal, there's a lot of ISR across the border. There's going to be, I presume, large losses on a withdrawal. But as well, in winter, that's going to become more of a problem. This right here is either the greatest tactical move Ukraine has ever made or the worst. There's no in between. Either it's going to be a nightmare in winter for Ukraine or a nightmare in winter for Russia. At this point, I think it's going to be a nightmare for Ukraine. I can't see what I hope that it works in the opposite way to that. I hope that, there's this, we come out of here and then we attack here and blah, blah, blah. But I just don't see the point of this at the moment. And forget what people are saying on Twitter from their basement somewhere. The dudes on the front lines couldn't give a shit about these strikes against an oil field. They need dudes at the front because they're getting overrun 6-1. They don't have ammo. There's no morale. It's a fucking struggle, and it's heading into a bad time. Like I've always said, my concern is always with the boys in the front line and reasonable tactical decisions to try and reduce suffering, whether that is reduce suffering of POWs or guys fighting for their country. I don't care what Twitter says. And if that puts me in one basket or the other, they can go and get fucked. Now, let's talk about South Korea. Now, South Korea, like I said in the beginning, they're a massive producer of arms and armoured vehicles. Germany has been a bit like, because of that. Ukraine, of course, want to get their hands on some of those weapon systems, some fantastic weapon systems coming out of South Korea. Really, really good. I will admit, it seems like these other manufacturers got a little bit greedy and dropped the ball on a lot of these systems. There was a lot of systems of which, from Rheinmetall and the like, which has always been from there. So it was like, we'll just feed in. New kids on the block came in and just blew that out of the water for price. Everything was better, things like the K2s, whatever. But, of course, this is Rustem Umerov that Ukraine will buy the place. So, Ukrainian delegation, we met with the President and Minister of Defence and a special delegation to purchase our weapons, including medium-range surface-to-air missiles. It's been reported our government expressed reluctance from Umerov. Umerov said South Korea has refused to sell weapons to Ukraine. It is important to understand that Ukraine wanted to buy weapons, not get them for free, but we were still refused. So they wanted to buy them. I don't know where that money came from in the very beginning, but Ukraine wanted to buy them. South Korea said even if you want to buy them, it's a no, which is a big kick in the nuts for Umarov and Ukraine. Ukraine sent a government out by South Korea. This is a South Korean article, but there's no coming through. The weapons that Ukraine currently requested for sale are non-lethal weapons, such as this interception system, local air defense radar, and artillery radar. So those non-lethals, it's probably good odds those will go through. But they also Ukraine wanted charge for 155 shells. It is difficult to provide lethal artillery shells, but they're asking for at least the explosives to be sold. So the charge for these. This is one of the things that there's a huge shortage, not only in shells, but in like individual bits and pieces. Multiple defence industry officials, major domestic defence companies such as LIG, Next One, Hanwha, Hyundai, have also been contacted by Ukraine regarding the purchase of weapons. But the Ministry of National Defence reported and instructed defence companies to refrain from individual contact. It is reported. So they're saying Ukraine's contacting these private companies saying, hey, we want to buy shit. And South Korean government is saying to those companies, there shouldn't be contact or sale privately between here, which is fair enough. The government expressed its intention to make it difficult because the government's review determined an exporting weapons to Ukraine would likely violate the Foreign Trade Act, which restricts exports to war zones. So South Korea has a Foreign Trade Act, and this includes provisions that restrict export of military equipment to conflict zones. So if there wasn't a conflict, it can be, but as soon as there is, it can't export to there. The exact opposite of probably the Yanks. This policy reflects a long-standing principle to avoid direct involvement in active conflicts. And then we've seen a huge boom in Korean defence, K-pop, K-defence. Of this will not be possible until 2030, and there's no inventory for exporting K9, K2 or Chunmoo. Of course, these K9, K2, Poland has a huge order in for those, and the amount of countries wanting to get their bloody hands on this equipment at the moment, it's a long way behind. Anyway, I'm not sure how it could go if it went through an intermediary. I don't know. South Korea maintains a delicate relationship with Russia. While the two countries are not close allies, of course not, Russia plays a role in regional security, particularly regarding North Korea. So it's one of these, you've sort of got to stay on some sort of terms, because the last thing South Korea wants is North Korea gaining some level of technology or weapon system right on their border. The Foreign Trade Act provides legal framework for this cautious approach, but broader geopolitical calculations also play a significant role. So it does seem like South Korea has pulled out the Foreign Trade Act as, look, we can't do this, but it does seem like they're more concerned about the geopolitical situation, but it's using that as the legal framework in this. After meeting with the Special Envoy, the President stated that they decided to continue sharing information on the dispatch of troops in North Korea and the transfer of weapons and technology between North Korea and Russia while cooperating with the US and other allies. Again, wait and see if those North Koreans ever show up on the front lines. The longer it goes on, the more I'm thinking maybe not. Of course, last week, the big news, and everyone got a big push in views because it became then trendy again, is the ATACMS getting signed off and then Russia responding with the single Oroshnik. But we are yet to see if Russia can do more than that or what the damage actually was. Now, this is a Q&A press conference with media and, of course, Russian President Vladimir Putin. During a recent narrow format meeting, you met this question. You mentioned that Moscow has responded to the ongoing usage of US missiles for attacks on Russian territory. Indeed, twice following the Oroshnik response. So the response to that initial attack was the Oroshnik, and then twice since then we've seen the ATACMS fired. Subsequently, ATACMS were employed twice more in the Kursk region. Simultaneously, you underlined that Moscow is preparing for a further escalation from the West. Precisely, I not only emphasise this, but also stated that we took action last night. So that initial response was the Oroshnik, then the 2 times following, and then last night we saw those like 100 missiles, 100 drones go in. That is what Putin is saying. But I think everyone's waiting to see if there's another Oroshnik, if there's something else. Question again in the slide. My question pertains to the measure Russia is ready to implement. In your view, are there ongoing risks associated with the Western missiles being used against Russian territory? It's a question for the West, whether they intend to persist with these actions. At this point, where there hasn't been, there's been one counter, but nothing really. Like this missile strike last night, that wasn't like something way out of the ordinary. I guess we will see. These actions denote the direct involvement of Western nations in an armed conflict. They're experts at orchestrating flight paths, relaying intelligence to themselves, and coordinating strikes on targets within the Russian Federation. At this point in time, I don't believe we can say that we are not at some level of conflict with Russia. Are we at full-out war with Russia? Well, no, because the boys are not dying. Western lads aren't dying on the front lines. They're not fighting the Russians directly. But to say that, Russia is saying that they'll bomb these areas in Ukraine and the West providing all this, it's hard to say that there's not then a conflict going on between, even if it's a semi-cold war. I indicated that they received a response today. Our armed forces have been executing retaliatory strikes over the past few days, these missile attacks. For instance, it'd be futile to target a minor objective with a hypersonic missile, akin to using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. However, we utilise our entire arsenal against significant targets. As I've previously mentioned, we do not rule out the combat employment of Oshnik on military industrial facilities or command centres, including those in Kyiv. We remain cognizant to the Kyiv authorities. We continue their attempts to target our critical assets, including those in St. Petersburg and Moscow. There's been other UAV attacks back against Russia today. So it's a bit of this to and from, and it's a bit like this escalatory ladder that's like, well, I don't want to go up because they don't want to go up, but if they go up, we have to go up. It's a weird thing with these press conferences, whether honestly, if it's in Russia and it's Putin and the journos asking, or if it's in Ukraine and it's journalists there asking Zelensky, I wish someone would really be like, well, what do you fucking mean by that? Like, journalists, it seems, are just now like drinking Kool-Aid of whatever country they're in, rather than like asking like, Putin, what the fuck is going on here? And people go, oh, well, it's dangerous. Well, then you're doing the wrong job. I wish that I could enter and actually have the I wish I was a large enough platform so, people would actually take me seriously and go, look, I want to speak to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. I want to speak to presidents. I want to do whatever. But of course, I don't work for one of the big media, and I'll ask hardship like, Putin, don't talk about history. Justify to me this, or Zelensky, justify the 18 and 25s not being mobilised if you want to retake Crimea militarily, although that's out of the realm we hear. But interesting. Anyway, this was actually reshared by Russia today in like an infographic that I saw on Twitter. Now I say it, I don't know how RT is working on Twitter. But anyway, they speak about the heated temperature of 4,000 degrees of the Oshnik. Now, what I can't get out of this is that the warhead if it explodes, or is that the outside temperature on like the heat shell of that re-entering? The reason I bring this up is to do with laser weapons. So the newest air defense is going to have some sort of like laser burnout. It's being used on some systems already and some planes around the world. But the problem is, something that can burn it that hot has heat shielding on it. It's going to take those lasers significantly longer to counter that system. These are moving very fast. If something's moving at 3 kilometers a second and it takes you 10 seconds to kill one of them, it's going to take a hell of a long time. And if it's a kinetic energy weapon, I don't know how much effect that's even going to have if you take out the guidance system. It's still going to hit something very quickly. And Putin talked about this. Kinetic impact is a formidable force, akin to a meteorite impact. History has shown us the effects and consequences of meteorite impacts. They have been sufficient to create entire lakes or wipe out the old dinosaurs. So I still think the Oshnik is some level of kinetic weapon. That said, the question is accuracy. That is the question of the day, is how accurate is this? Because I've done a little bit of research and it seems like it's very difficult with the heat, with the speed, with the thin air high up. It's very difficult to actually get that bang onto target. And typically the independent multiple entry re-entry vehicle, they don't have to be that accurate, because if you've got a 50 megaton bomb coming in, your accuracy doesn't really matter if you're leveling cities. So let's talk about what the second worst haircut on this channel, Mr. Boris Johnson, has said about British troops going to Ukraine and the end goal. Now remember, the reason a lot of military campaigns fail is there isn't a clear, achievable end goal. That is ultimately why I believe the West failed in Afghanistan. There was never a clear end goal. The goalposts getting moved and moved and moved. But there needs to be a clear end goal, but it needs to be an achievable end goal as well. I can't just say that I want to be 6'4" and shredded. Well, it needs to be achievable. Let's look at what Bozza has said.
My money, that has to be NATO. I don't see any alternative. Now,
so there has to be entry for Ukraine into NATO.
You ask, what would be the UK commitment? Well, I think we should. I hope this would be something that appeals to President Trump as well. It would be a commitment that is very substantially funded by the Ukrainians themselves. So I think we should certainly be putting troops in to backfill. Absolutely.
British troops.
Yeah, I think in the areas, I don't think we should be sending in combat troops to take on the Russians, but I think as part of the solution, as part of the end state.
So part of the end state that there should be British forces funded by Ukraine in Ukraine if there is some level of stabilisation. But where then is that end? What is the actual end state here?
You're going to want to have multinational European peacekeeping forces monitoring the border.
The thing is with that is exactly why Russia actually launched this war. And I am of the opinion that Russia would forgo majority of the territory, maybe Crimea. They would forgo all of that to stop NATO entry and those forces. So if that is the end state goal that Bozza and if Trump come up with, the war is going to continue.
But also helping the Ukrainians. And I cannot see that such a European operation could possibly happen without the British. We've got to be there.
It's such, I tell you, the only thing that's gone downhill more than the UK is Megan Fox since the Transformers. It's upsetting.
That's a long day's march from the UK sending troops to fight Russians, as I said. But that's got to be part of the package. I think when it comes to funding the whole thing, well, there is this $300 billion, the frozen Russian assets.
So
why on earth haven't we liberated those? And
okay, so he says there's $300 billion in frozen Russian assets. Why on earth haven't we liberated that, sent that to Ukraine to fund whether it is some level of NATO stabilisation force, further arms to Ukraine, buying South Korean weapons, whatever? Well, I can give you the answer to that because it could potentially undermine the dollar, the euro, the pound with, of course, other countries rising to a hell of a lot of power because there's a lot of foreign investment in a lot of different currencies into the West per se, that countries may go, oh shit, I'm a Chinese billionaire who, owns all this shit in Australia and here and there and whatever. If China do this, well, then they're going to freeze that. Okay, I'm going to withdraw that money and do this. It could undermine trillions of dollars rather than billions. Taking the profits on that money, I think, is a really good gig. I think that circumvents some of those problems. Accessing that money itself, well, there's a reason, I guess, why it hasn't been accessed. But again, what no one speaks about is you could go to Epstein's Island and find half the politicians and $1 trillion. But if there's not men to be on the back end of those weapons, it's going to be a problem. Let's go and talk about what he sees as the end state and goal.
We see this thing ending up. And how can we expect the Ukrainians to continue to shed their blood in the way that they are, and to fight so heroically in the way that they do, with so little sense of what we, their supporters, actually regard as the goal? What's the plan? And we never spell it out. And I think this is becoming
I like when politicians forget when they were in power, like where you could really actually help. But again, what I will say is no one ever laid out like a plan. There's goals. There's no plan. I honestly think at the end of this, I think Ukraine is going to turn around and go, you guys sort of fucked us. We didn't mobilise when we should have because no one, we're getting 10% of what we were promised. I think there's going to be a lot of and I agree, I'd be pissed. If I was on the front line, I'd be like, hang on, NATO signed off this and it never got here, or some of our officials through corruption took it, or X, Y, and Z. Where's the shit on the front line? And again, it's a bit rich and Polly's who could have really done stuff, and there's a lot more to say about
major drawback to the hopes of delivering peace and getting the outcome we all want. Unless and until the British government, Starmer, the US government, now Donald Trump, spell out where this is going,
This is the thing. No one is willing to spell out where this is going. Where is this going? And that would be my question here is, well, okay, Bozza, you were as involved as anyone else in the world in this. Where then is it going? Where is it going?
You're just going to see more loss of life and more suffering. So
and this that goes into exactly what I said earlier. More loss of life, more suffering, and I fucking hate it. I lie in bed every night thinking about the boys in the trenches who are fucking doing this. And anyway, it seems like there's the choice of mobilization, negotiation, and in the middle this dick swinging. And it seems like Ukraine is on this pendulum of like, well, could we mobilise and get, well, the weapons aren't coming, there's not enough support, we're not going to negotiate because there's problems. And it seems like the ones who are in power, who are, sort of questioning others, aren't willing to self-impose and self-question. Anyway, I'm going to watch that full interview through. I think there are some interesting pieces in that, but I think there needs to be some level of responsibility taken as well. Where is this war going? That's a good question. What is the end state of this war that is realistic and achievable in some level of time frame? Again, I don't know. People talk about Russia's economy. Well, what is going to break first? What is showing more signs of breaking, the Russian economy or the Ukrainian front line at this point? I don't know. But again, going back into those demographics, Russia may go, if we can just survive another few years of war, we may have more of a collapse if our economy can push through. And I'm not qualified enough to look at the Russian economy. I don't think many are. Because plenty of actual economists said it would collapse in 22, 23, and we're now about to be in 25. So I don't think there's many because it's such a closed off, it's very hard to get an idea. But I did hear an economist say, and he copped a lot of criticism, so it's probably right. He said there are some economies that run off spreadsheets and meetings, and there's other economies that run off oil and gas. GDP versus GDP is not comparable. And I thought, that's very interesting. Anyway, legends, fantastic day. I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.